So thank you, everyone. Again, welcome from AITP-LA. And thank you, Vivek, for leading the conversation on ChatGPT. I guess this is a topic that's always like you go to like any of the networking events and you can talk about ChatGPT because everyone is using ChatGPT in like some either like in some details, right? So right now, I want to take a moment to introduce our board members. You'll see like some of the board members in this meeting right now, and we want to bring exciting programs for you. We at AITP-LA are focused on providing informative events for our audience. So we do our virtual meetings almost every month, and we are also looking at doing the in-person events. So since we have a smaller group like AITP-LA, and Roger has been part of AITP-LA for many years, and he's like the heart and soul of AITP Los Angeles chapter. And we have been doing in-person meetings for many years. And when COVID started, we changed to virtual meetings. So we bring like speakers in the field of IT, uh, or like the current technologies or the current topics that talk about IT, what's going to happen in the field of IT and forecasting, like work balances, those kind of topics. So we talk about those. And as a member of AITB chapter, you'll be learning about like latest like IT industry trends. You'll be also like able to like polish your leadership skills. You'll be able to like do networking. So we do have positions open if you're interested in joining our AITP chapter as a board member or as any kind of capacity. We would love to have you join our AITP membership. It's also about not just about like IT and like learning new technologies. It's also about like making relationships, right? So it's about people bringing people together to foster innovation and build professional networks. So just few logistics before we start our meeting. You can put yourself on mute, and if you don't want your video to be shared or because we are going to put this recording on our website, you can just stop your video. Otherwise, you can leave your video on. And any questions that you have, you can put in chat, or you can ask the questions after the presentation is over. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Roger to introduce our guest speaker. Over to you, Roger.
Great, thank you. Yeah, tonight we're honored to have Dr. Gleb Tsipursky as our speaker. He's a behavioral scientist, and he's the CEO of a future of work consultancy called Disaster Avoidance Experts. He spoke with us a couple of years ago on decision making. He's the best-selling author of 7 books, including some global bestsellers. His newest book is called Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams, a manual on benchmarking to best practices for competitive advantage. That's what he's going to be focusing on tonight. He's going to be talking about what he calls a hybrid first work model, which apparently can result in much higher retention and productivity, reduce costs, as well as boosting engagement, innovation, collaboration, and mitigate risk. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gleb.
All right. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that introduction, Roger, and appreciate y'all coming. Let's talk a little bit about hybrid work. So I talk to 5 to 10 IT leaders every week about how to do hybrid work effectively. And I hear a lot of complaints and a lot of worries about hybrid work. This is definitely the future of work. That's very clear. But people don't know how to do hybrid work well and effectively. So let's talk about using hybrid work for you as IT professionals to improve retention and productivity while cutting costs. Now, you might not be personally in the immediate role of implementing these strategies. Hopefully you are, but you can be in the role of bringing them to the information of your leadership team, your IT teams, your CTOs, and so on, CIOs. So you can do this. You can bring this information and you can make an impact. to have a situation that's going to be better for you and for the company as a whole. But how do you do that? Well, the first question to talk about is how we think about hybrid work. Now let's think, this is a presentation, you're going to finish it, and then you're going to go for dinner. And you will see that you'll open your fridge and you'll see that you'll have the choice of 2 ice creams. One that contains 10% fat and another that's 90% fat-free. So what ice cream sounds more appealing? One that's 90% fat-free or 10% fat? So 10% fat or 90% fat-free? Please go ahead and vote. You should all be able to see the poll in your screen, so please go ahead and vote. Okay, 5 more seconds. Make your voice heard. Okay, so we see that the overwhelming majority, 80%, prefer one that's 90% fat-free. But let's think about this for a little bit. So 80% of you prefer one that's 90% fat-free, but 90% fat-free means it has 10% fat, right? And 10% fat means it has 90% fat-free. You are all numerate folks, you're in IT, you know what that means. These are the same, 90% fat-free and 10% fat. Okay, whoever's starting and stopping sharing, please stop. I'm going to manage the polls. Thank you very much. Okay. So as you can see, these are absolutely the same things. And why do we have a preference for 90% fat-free? Why is that a preference for us? Well, it's all due to the framing effect. It's how the information is presented. If it's presented as 90% fat-free, it sounds more appealing and more good for us, more healthy for us. So how information is presented to us really influences our beliefs and actions. So think about your frame around hybrid work and remote work, and think about your leadership's frame around hybrid work and remote work. These can make a big difference in the decision-making that will take place in these areas. And the crucial thing is to think about how the leadership frames the question of people. You've probably heard the phrase many times that people are our greatest resource, but many leaders don't really live by that principle. They're really comfortable with traditional office culture and they want to turn back the clock, denying the reality of the major disruption associated with the pandemic. And so what they fail to realize, is that the pandemic and the disruption associated with it in terms of hybrid work and remote work is not a loss. They think of it as a loss. They think of it as a big problem. It's a disruption. That means it's an opportunity. It's a major opportunity to maximize productivity and engagement, retention, and therefore cutting costs. In order to do so, they need to put aside default assumptions, habits, and preferences, focus on business objectives and outcomes, rather than what's personally comfortable, to overcome decision-making cognitive biases, errors around the future of work, and integrate best practices on new work arrangements. So that's the shape of the presentation. Let's talk a little bit about the data on this topic before talking about some of the mistakes that leaders tend to make. There are 8 major independent surveys from organizations like the Harvard Business School, the Society for Human Resource Management, that show that the large majority of workers, when they're given the opportunity, don't want traditional office-centric work. 75 to 85% of workers who can do their work remotely, like all of you can as IT professionals, don't want traditional office-centric work. 25 to 35% want full-time remote work. So that means something like 15 to 25% want full-time in office work, and something like 50 to 60% want hybrid work. 40 to 55% would leave their job if forced to come in full-time, but over 70% would be less likely to leave if offered substantial remote work. So that's very clear evidence that this is good that offering substantial remote work, meaning half the work week, not saying full-time remote work, but substantial remote work over half the work week is great for retention and recruitment. It's also really good for productivity because when people work remotely, they are more productive. Over 55% report higher productivity and only 15% lower. So 30% report the same. And the 15% that report lower, that aligns well with the people who actually want to work in the office. And that's not simply self-reporting. Employee monitoring software shows the same thing. For example, there was a study that showed that remote staff were 5% more productive. And research, peer-reviewed research, shows the same thing. So there was a Stanford University study that found that in May 2020, immediately after the shutdowns, we were 5% more productive when we worked remotely. But in 2 years later, that productivity improvement rose from 5% to 9%. Why did it rise over those 2 years? Well, during the 2 years of the pandemic lockdowns, we learned how to work remotely better. We learned techniques for collaboration, for leadership, for management. We invested into home office spaces, into back-end technologies, utilities, and governments invested into faster internet. Workers invested into their home offices, computers invested into their companies, invested into their IT infrastructure. So that all increased the productivity of remote work. Remote and hybrid employees, no question, have better well-being. Over 70%, 75% feel less stressed, over 70% have better well-being, and over 75% report being happier. Now, given this information, let's do another poll. What is your preferred working style? It's fully remote, 1 day in the office, 2 days in the office, 3 days in the office, 4 days in the office, or full-time, 5 days in the office. Okay, 5 more seconds to make your voice heard. Okay, so we see that this is generally aligned with the preferences. So a little bit less people here want fully remote than others outside. The large majority want to be there in the office less than half of the work week, and no one wants to be there for full time. Good to know. So now you know what your colleagues are looking for. But most people, the plurality, are looking for 1 to 2 days, 2 days in the office, some 1 day, some 3 days, but 2 days seems to be the alignment. Great. Now, why do leaders make mistakes around the future of work? Well, they run into a series of decision-making errors that come from how our brains are wired. Now, our brains aren't really wired for the modern environment. These are called cognitive biases, the ways that our brains are miswired for the modern environment. Our brains are wired for the savanna environment, when we lived in small tribes of 50 people to 150 people, not the modern world. We're connecting here as small squares in a Zoom screen. We're not wired for that. We're wired for the ancient savanna environment. So that ancient savanna, when we lived in those 50 to 150 people tribes, we had to survive based on the fight or flight reflex. And we had to, because our survival was very precarious, it was pretty bad once the situation changed. So we have a natural and intuitive impulse to get back to what we perceive as the status quo. It's called the status quo bias. And leaders who have been successful for 20, 30 years leading in the office, they want to get back to what they're successful at. And so that's why you see them calling for full-time returns to the office, or most of the time return to the office. They desire to maintain or get back to the status quo and downplay the major disruption from the pandemic. In the savanna environment, there wasn't much disruption. The situation changed. There wasn't really the situation changing as a result of external conditions in fundamental ways. It's changing of the seasons was the main dynamic. In our modern environment, we have many changes, whether it's due to the pandemic, whether, as we're talking about, the rise of AI like ChatGPT, the rise of smartphones, internet, the video conferencing technology, all of the fiscal crisis, all of these change the context, but we don't intuitively adapt to these changes. So that's really important for us to realize. So just like there are many people who, leaders especially, have a status quo bias around hybrid work and remote work, there are many people who have a status quo bias around ChatGPT and who don't sufficiently take advantage of the benefits that it's bringing and don't sharpen their skills to be aligned with that future, which is definitely going to be very much impacted by generative AI. Another dynamic is called the empathy gap. That's a misunderstanding of the emotions of other people, especially people who are not like you, underestimating other people's emotions and their decisions. So leaders tend to underestimate the desire for flexibility and well-being that's fundamentally driving people after the pandemic. People realigned their perspectives. We have many more people who are less focused on being worker bees and many more people who care a lot more about flexibility and well-being, and that's really important for them. These are very talented, high-performance people, and they leave companies that are not willing to provide them with some flexibility and not care for their well-being. And so that's really important for leaders to realize as they think about this. I helped 23 companies by now transition to hybrid work and remote work, and I have conversations like this all the time because executives have a much stronger desire to work in the office. There was just a survey that came out that showed that 77% of executives want to work in the office something like 3 to 5 days a week, and only something like 30% of employees want to work in the office that much. And another cognitive bias is called functional fixedness. Functional fixedness. You might have heard of this as the hammer-nail syndrome. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, when you learn one way to function, you perceive that as the right way of functioning. So you learn one way of collaborating, of leading people, of managing teams, and you tend to apply that to all other situations. And that's why you see so many leaders transposing office culture into hybrid work and remote work. What ends up happening is that they're shoehorning hybrid work, office culture into hybrid work and remote work, and then not realizing how damaging it is. So that's really bad. That's really problematic when they're shoehorning traditional office culture into hybrid work and remote work, because then it doesn't work very well. And they say, well, we failed to adapt to this. I guess we need to go back to the office most or all of the work week. So this is not being very strategic. All right. Let's take a look at another poll. Which of these cognitive biases that we just talked about do you think might be the most problematic for the future of work in your workplace? Please go ahead and vote. Five more seconds. Okay, so we have a tie between the empathy gap and functional fixedness. Great, good to know. So this is what you should be thinking about and taking back to your leadership teams so that they can figure these things out and say, okay, these are the things to watch out for, the bad decision-making patterns that you don't want to fall into. All right. What about the best practices? Let's switch to those now for competitive advantage in the future of work. We very clearly see that a team-led model is the best practice. You don't want to make the decision at the top levels for everyone. You don't want to say, like Apple did, everyone go back to the office Tuesday and Thursday and choose one day. That is not a good approach. Or like Amazon again, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever. All of these companies, Disney saying, everyone go back to the office 4 days a week. That is not a good strategy. It's not pushing decision-making down to the lower level. People at the lower level within their own teams know what they need, and members will hold each other accountable. So that's why teams should lead the decision-making. The team supervisor, together with the team members, should make the decision on what works best for everyone. And what generally tends to happen when you do this, and this will go differently in different companies, some of them will not want to do anyone fully remote, but most companies will be somewhat flexible if they want to hire individual contributors who are really talented for much less money than they need for office-based staff. So hybrid first for the majority, and then consider having a minority fully remote. You don't need to, but many of the companies that I worked with chose to do so. But some of the companies didn't, and that's great. It depends on the company culture. So hybrid employees should be spending something like 1 to 2 days in the office, and they should be the majority of the company, 70 to 90%. Fully remote employees would be the minority, 10 to 30%. Now, why only 1 to 2 days in the office? Well, there's extensive research showing that people who spend 1 to 2 days in the office do best. There was a Harvard Business School study of a major company that found that people who spend 1 to 2 days in the office, closer to 1%, do better than either people who spend 3 to 5 days in the office or people who spend less than 1 day in the office, more fully remote and so on, coming in rarely. So that's one dynamic. Then Gallup also found the same information, that people who spend 60 to 80% of their time at home, closer to 80%, so that 4 days out of a 5-day work week, perform best. as long as there's an adoption of best practices for hybrid and remote work arrangements. And that adoption of best practices includes providing training based on what I'm talking about. Effective hybrid work, what to do at home and what to focus on in the office. This is a major question. What is the office for anyway? Why should you even go to the office? That needs to be answered. People aren't children. Adults aren't children. They want to know, why are you asking us to do the commute? The commute is something that the large majority of people hate. And if you're one of those few who doesn't, congrats to you. But the large majority of people really hate the commute. It's the most stressful part of their day for many people, and it's the most dangerous when they're most likely to be killed. And it's really not pleasant. Lots of emotional labor, takes over an hour per day on average. And it's also quite costly. So gas prices, parking, public transit for those who are in the lucky privileged position of being able to take public transit to their workplace, but still not great in many ways. And you have to pay for the restaurants, expensive restaurants around. You have to put on fancy clothing. People don't like that. So you want to have a good reason for people to come to the office. And there are only 4 good reasons for people to come to the office. One is collaboration. So more intense forms of collaboration are better done in the office. 2 is conversations that are nuanced, like about conflicts or performance conversations. That's better done in the office. 3, mentoring of various sorts. Mentoring and training is more intense forms of training, and mentoring is better done in the office. And 4, socializing. So socializing, of course, is better done in the office. So those are activities that usually don't take more than 10, maybe 20% of the time. So it's fine. For most people, you can fit them into a day a week, maybe 2 days, depending on how they're structured in the office. You also want to train people on effective virtual communication and collaboration, so people know how to communicate and collaborate virtually, and you don't have these problems as a result of problematic communication and collaboration. Okay. Now let me share with you about an example from Los Angeles of an organization that adopted these techniques, these hybrid first team-led model. So this is from the Information Sciences Institute. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's a major AI and other cybersecurity information sciences research institute in the University of Southern California, based in Los Angeles, Marina del Rey. It's 400 people, and this is Craig Knobloch, who's the executive director of the Research Sciences Institute. And he's going to tell you about his adoption of the hybrid first team-led model. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Gleb Tsipursky came to my attention sometime back during the pandemic when I was planning to have our research institute follow the standard path that all the big corporations are following. So Apple and Google were announcing plans to have people come back 3 days a week. So I thought, that seems like a good plan. So we actually sent out a message, said, okay, starting this date, everyone's coming back 3 days a week, and then can work from home 2 days a week. And then I saw a video that Gleb actually, a video talk that Gleb actually gave for AITP-LA that really actually changed my mind about this. And it was a video about hybrid work and how important it was to actually embrace it. And one of the things I was impressed in the video is that all these interesting ideas about how to make hybrid work more effective and stuff. So I signed up for a meeting with Gleb and learned quite a bit more about how to do hybrid work well. And so Gleb has come on as a consultant for the Information Science Institute and has been really helpful in terms of putting us much more in a leadership position in terms of figuring out how to do hybrid work. So we changed our policies. We are much more flexible about who can work at home and allowing people to work from home, whatever makes sense with respect to their supervisor, creating spaces in people's home offices, figuring out how to onboard people in a way that, when people haven't met in person, that is more effective. So I think he's been incredibly helpful in terms of really transitioning us to be sort of a lead in how we manage hybrid work at the Institute. So it's been incredibly useful with all of Gleb's advice, and I appreciate all the help he's given us with respect to moving forward with our hybrid work plans.
Okay, now that you checked that out, what are your thoughts about this team-led approach? How valuable do you think it would be to integrate this team-led approach into your workplace based on what you heard and what your analysis is? Highly valuable, moderately valuable, not valuable. Please go ahead and vote. 5 more seconds. Make your voice heard. Okay, great. So half of you would see it as highly valuable and half as moderately. That's wonderful. So highly valuable, you want to take this information back to your team, try to get them to implement it. For moderately valuable, just talk about it, see what elements of it might make sense for you and adopt those. Great. So let's talk about some of the challenges that I often hear about hybrid work. So that's collaboration is a big, big challenge. So how do you solve collaboration in hybrid work settings? Well, you want to replace in-person co-working with virtual co-working, which means working alongside team members on a video conference call. It's for fully virtual teams or on hybrid teams for the days that you're not in the office. What you do is you sign into a 1-hour video conference call, much like this one, and you intend to work on your individual tasks. So you start by sharing the project on which you'll work. This is for a 6 to 8 people team. Share the project on which you'll work. Again, individual projects, not intending to chat to people to collaborate. Then you turn off your microphones, you leave your speakers on, and your video is optional. So it depends on whether you prefer to leave your video on or off. Then what happens is that people they do their work for the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Then someone has a question or innovation idea or a problem to solve. Then you turn on your microphone and you share. And you have a chat, maybe for 3 to 5 minutes. Other team members can answer, they can do screen sharing. And then you stop and you move on to working on your individual tasks again. And then maybe another 5 to 10 to 15 minutes, the same thing happens. And you have during an hour, usually 3 to 4 of these sessions. So you end by turning on your microphone and sharing what you all accomplished. Now, this is great for helping teams bond. So helping teams bond, improving collaboration is very valuable. It facilitates innovation, of course, because of the problem solving, question answering, innovation ideas. And it's very helpful for integrating junior team members. So this is a very helpful and very valuable technique for the junior team member integration. So that's collaboration. What about innovation? That's another big challenge that I hear talked about often. How do you solve innovation in hybrid and remote work? Well, especially for, of course, IT folks. You want to replace in-person brainstorming, which is the traditional way of innovating, with virtual asynchronous brainstorm. So traditional brainstorming is very useful for innovation, but we've known for a long time, the behavioral science perspective, that it has a lot of serious problems. One is called production blocking. That's when you have an idea, but somebody else has another idea, and they're talking about their ideas, and you don't want to interrupt them, and you lose track of your idea because the conversation went away from you. Another is evaluation apprehension. So evaluation apprehension is when you have an idea, but it seems too out of the box, or maybe it implicitly criticizes another team member, and you don't want to share it. Evaluation apprehension and production blocking are especially problematic for lower status team members. Evaluation apprehension is also quite problematic for people who tend to be pessimistic, so negatively oriented, anxious about the world. Production blocking is a problem for people who are introverted and reluctant to interrupt others. Social loafing is a problem for everyone. It's when there are the more people that are in the room, the less hard we tend to work. That's just what the research shows. Virtually synchronous brainstorming is a technique that solves these problems. So it's especially helpful for junior, lower status team members, introverts, and pessimists. Let's talk about how it works. First, you generate and input your ideas asynchronously at different times and anonymously. So you can use Microsoft Forms, Google Forms, Mural, or something like this. Asynchronicity, not at the same time, is very useful for introverted team members and lower status ones. So you just sit at your computer, whether in the office or at home, and you put your ideas into Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, Mural, whatever it might be. And because there's no production blocking, then the introverted team members and lower status ones aren't blocked from sharing their ideas. Anonymity is very helpful for people who are pessimistic and lower status, because there's no worries that your ideas will be negatively judged by others. Then, step 2, everyone gets a spreadsheet of the remaining ideas. So now you have, let's say, 6 people, you had 10 ideas per person. And the facilitator, so if I'm facilitating or if there's another team lead who's facilitating, get the spreadsheet. There are some duplicates. You cross those out. You have 50 ideas left. And you give them to everyone. A separate spreadsheet, anonymous to everyone. And so all of them anonymously comment on each idea and evaluate quantitatively each idea on a scale of 0 to 5 for how innovative, practical, and exciting it is. And so now each idea of those 50 ideas has a score of 0 to 15. And you have 6 team members, so each idea has a score of 0, anywhere from 6 times 0 to 6 times 15, which is 90. So it's 0 to 90. And so now you have ideas, and you can put a cutoff point, let's say at 80 points, and you have the best ideas floating to the top, the ones that have 80 or more. And then you rate those ideas, you evaluate them on a meeting, synchronous meeting. I recommend doing this in person for a hybrid team, of course, virtually for a remote team. So you have a synchronous meeting to determine how to implement the best ideas. You choose the best ideas and you decide how to implement. There's a peer-reviewed study that showed that this results in more total ideas and more novel ideas than traditional brainstorming. So it's very helpful that way. It's a very useful technique. Okay. Now, let me share with you another person who will share about using these ideas. And this is Susan Winchester. She's the Chief Human Resource Officer at Applied Materials, which is a Fortune 200 high-tech manufacturing company in the semiconductor industry. She'll share about using virtually synchronous brainstorming.
Hi, I'm Susan Winchester, and it's my delight and pleasure to tell you a little bit about our experience with Dr. Gleb. He had a big positive impact at Applied Materials. Our leaders and engineers love data-based, research-based insights, which is exactly what he brings. He hit it out of the park. And he used a team-led process, which was incredibly engaging. He introduced us to a concept he created called asynchronous brainstorming. It was a process that we used with hundreds and hundreds of leaders globally at the same time. We did this during our CEO kickoff session for our strategy work. And in a very short amount of time, we were able to get great benefits. I also love the work he's doing to educate leaders around the power and positive benefits of hybrid and virtual working. And one of his techniques that I'm planning to use, because I think it's so cool, is what he calls virtual co-working, where you and as many co-workers, colleagues as you'd like, create a virtual meeting and no purpose or agenda, but rather just to be working with one another. So I highly endorse Dr. Gleb's work. Love him.
Okay, so given that, what are your perspectives on how valuable it would be to integrate virtually synchronous brainstorming into your workplace? Please go ahead and vote. Five more seconds. Make your voice heard. Okay, great. So it seems that you either perceive, just under half of you perceive it as highly valuable, just over half as moderately valuable. Again, take this information back to your teams, especially if you perceive it as highly valuable, integrate it, and hopefully you'll find it useful. All right, good. So talk about the key takeaways in this inflection on the future of work. You want to integrate addressing decision-making cognitive biases into your culture to optimize business outcomes in the future of work, despite some personal discomfort. Use the team-led hybrid first model with a minority fully remote for the retention of best talent, improving productivity, maximizing well-being, and addressing burnout, all of which, of course, reduces costs. And adapt your culture to hybrid and remote work. Training on effective hybrid and virtual communication and collaboration. Integrate virtual co-working for collaboration, team building, and integrating junior staff. Integrate virtually synchronous brainstorming to innovate and problem solve creatively. And then it's up to you. Go out there, make it happen, bring this information back to your teams. All right, everyone. I'll be happy to send you some free resources. So if you did not register for them yet in the sign up, you can go to tinyurl.com/DA event if you're watching this on the video. Otherwise, there'll be another poll. But if you're watching this on video, go to tinyurl.com/DAE event for the resources. Again, tinyurl.com/DAE event for the resources. And that will include a copy of my best-selling book, Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams, and a free coaching session available for the first 3 claimants. Now, there will be a poll on whether you want the resources, so please go ahead and vote, and I'll be happy to take any questions at this stage. You can chat the questions or you can unmute yourself, whatever works for you.
So I have a question, Dr. Gleb.
Yes.
So I know we talked about productivity, right? Actually, I have a few questions. And one of our pre-networking or networking topic was, how do we measure productivity, right? So in your experience, right, how are companies measuring productivity? Are they using some tools, or just if you can share your thoughts about that?
Sure, I can give you an example actually of a study that was done on productivity. So this was Stanford University collaborated with a major travel agency called Trip.com. As you can guess from the name, it's a major travel agency. And what they did was a random assignment of half of the staff of Trip.com to working full-time in the office and another half to working part-time at home, part-time in the office, so hybrid schedule. And they found that after 6 months of this work, the software developers who were working at Trip.com had 8% more lines of code written. And this is, again, the same lines of the people who were working in the office, the people who were working at home, the same error rate. The error rate wasn't different, the accuracy quality rate, but the lines of code were quite a bit more written for the people who were working part-time, at least from home, compared to people who are working full-time in the office. So that's a good measure of productivity. It's a very clear, hard measure of productivity. Others, of course, are harder to measure. So that depends on how your manager evaluates your productivity, what kind of OKRs, objectives and key results you have, what are your KPIs, key performance indicators. But I gave that example because that was a really clear peer-reviewed research-based study. So after 6 months, the company definitely assigned everyone to that half-time schedule, to that schedule of hybrid schedule in the office. So that's an example.
Yeah. And I have another question. This is regarding the hybrid model, right? I know, you mentioned, some companies are requiring employees to come 4 days a week in office, some 3 days a week, right? And during COVID time, what we saw was a lot of employees, they moved, right? Before, everyone was closer to workplace because they were coming into office every day, and then they moved, right? And then those employees or resources are having really challenging time coming back to office. And some of them also moved to different city, right? So they're not even in the same city. And when I'm talking to people, they find it like people who have moved to a different city, they are not asked to come to the office, but people who have moved, let's say 50 miles from office, they are asked to come to office, right? So when I talk to people, they just feel like it's not fair. How do we tackle those situations?
Well, when a company I work with really wants its employees to come to the office for certain periods of time, I make sure they pay for relocation. So that's kind of the easiest and fairest way of tackling these sorts of issues.
Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, quick question.
Yeah.
Oh, so how do I know that at the company I'm at, there's a list of approved states where a remote employee could be fully remote from, and what is driving the what's behind that? What's behind the company making that particular decision? Like, for example, you could work from Texas, for example, remotely for a company that's in LA, but you couldn't work for, let's say, pick another state like West Virginia.
Sure. There are two things that mainly drive those things. One is the kind of local laws that are in that state. So some states have laws that make it easier or more difficult for people to work remotely due to their tax structure and so on, and lots of labor regulations. So that's one. The second is so that comes from the state. The second might come from the company, whether the company has a local corporation locally registered in that state. So some companies they might have their local offices registered in 10 states. And they say, well, you can work from those 10 states where we have local corporate bodies registered already, because otherwise they'd have to do a lot more hassle and setup to create local offices that they can track their employees. So those would be the two dynamics that I've seen. Regulations from each state and sometimes in each city, and then whether the company has a local body registered in each state.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
Dr. Tsipursky,
yes.
I have a question for you. You mentioned a little bit about training.
Yes.
Specifically about younger people who are maybe interns. Do you have anything special about training them?
You definitely want to do a mentoring program. So with interns or junior employees, I strongly recommend having a mentoring program. And not hiring remotely, hiring remotely is good for people who are already experienced and senior. If you're having very junior people who are recently out of school, they may not have the best skills and know how to work remotely effectively from the beginning. So I definitely bring them in at the early onward, at least, even if you intend them to work full-time remotely later, to get some onboarding skills and so on. Onboarding skills for how to work effectively in an office setting and to build relationships with colleagues. But generally with interns and with junior status folks, having a mentoring program, not simply the first 2 weeks of onboarding, but a mentoring program for the first 3 years is very valuable. Office-based mentoring is especially useful because in that environment, you build personal relationships, which are very valuable for people being vulnerable and being able to share their challenges in a way that it's harder to establish that vulnerability in a remote relationship.
Thank you.
Sure. Susan has a question in the chat. The challenge with team-led decision-making can be that no one takes leadership. How can the situation be addressed? So that's why there's a team lead. So you definitely want to make sure there's a team lead who will take responsibility for the eventual decision-making to be made. But the team lead, it's very clear the team lead should not make this decision solely by herself or himself. They should definitely do it in consensus with the other team members and align with what works best for the whole team. Okay, and Elizabeth asks, our organization has a mix of people who are in office 2 days a week, as well as folks who are fully remote, might come into office quarterly at most. What do you find is successful in some team members are in office and others are not? Well, what you really want to do is address the problem called proximity bias. I have a Harvard Business Review article about this. So if you Google my name and find that article in Harvard Business Review, it will talk about this proximity bias, which is a preference for people who are in person over those who are remote. That's a natural tendency and intuition, which unless you take steps to battle it, will really harm the organization going forward, because the people who are remote will always be second-class citizens.
Cool. Another question?
Yeah.
So how are companies are companies able to justify like keeping the same amount of office space if they only have people coming in like 2 or 3 days a week? Are they going more to hoteling models? What are they doing?
So it depends on the company. If a company, so I have a number of, like, let's say the Information Sciences Institute, shortly before the pandemic, they signed a 10-year lease. So, that's not something that they can anticipate. So they have to keep that space for another 7-8 years. So what they're doing is expanding the amount of collaborative space, and they're reducing some of their office space that they don't need, because they have like something like maybe 20% of their staff work full-time remotely now. So that's Information Sciences Institute. Other companies with whom I for whom I consult, yeah, they're definitely getting rid of some of their office space, and they're still transforming the rest of the space to be more collaborative space. Because if people are coming in to collaborate, to have socializing conversations, training, mentoring, personal conversation, like the conflictual conversations or reporting on performance management, you don't really need a personal desk. And so many of these companies, what they find they need and their employees ask for is things like soundproof booths, is things like huddle rooms, meeting rooms, lounges that enable them to collaborate, which is why they're coming to the office anyway.
Cool. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's what, Roger, I think that answers your question as well.
So just to add on to that, so are the companies doing like more kind of like conference rooms that are like hybrid? They are like more catered to hybrid meetings.
That's right. And what you want to do with a hybrid meeting conference room is to make sure to have large screens that people sit facing the screen, not facing the conference participants who are in the room should face the screen, not face each other. They should have a number of cameras, something like a meeting owl or another alternative, which shows the person speaking and shows the whole room. So you can see the person speaking and their facial expression and reactions clearly, like that they're highlighted. And you can see how other people are reacting to that person speaking, because that's really important. You also want to train meeting participants to everyone who is in the room should sign into the call on their laptop so that they can engage in chat and emoji usage, just like people who are coming in remotely, so that they can be on the same page and they can pay attention to that subcontext and the conversations that are going on. So that's really helpful. And that any sidebar conversations take place by chat so that other people can see them. So that's really useful. Finally, you'll want a meeting facilitator for the people who are remote. You already have a meeting facilitator for the room, usually happens to be the team leader. The team leader should appoint someone who would be a meeting facilitator for the people who are remote to make sure that they are advocated for by a person who is physically in the room.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, management. How to help train managers who are used to supervising people in post. Yeah, this is a fundamental issue. That's when I talk about training, you definitely want to train managers. So you want to train managers on some of the techniques that I talked about, a team-led model, and on how to collaborate and communicate effectively. You want to train them on virtual co-working. You want to train them on virtual asynchronous brainstorming. Another thing that I always train managers on is performance evaluation, for how to evaluate people's performance when they're working remotely. And that has to do with transitioning from that once annual performance evaluation review to the weekly one-on-ones, which the good managers have with their employees anyway, to add a performance evaluation element to it, where you set 3 to 5 weekly goals with each of your subordinates for the upcoming week. And then in the next meeting, you review the 3 to 5 goals that you have with that subordinate. You see how they did, you coach them on problem solving, and you set 3 to 5 goals for the week ahead. And so that keeps the subordinate and the supervisor aligned. So the manager and their team member are going to be much more aligned, because that tends to be the biggest problem, lack of alignment, which is they can easily align when they're in the office and they have those conversations when they're walking around. But if you don't have that alignment, that really hurts manager-subordinate relationships. So it's very helpful to have those weekly conversations, to have a performance management element in those weekly one-on-ones.
Related to that, in projects that I've been involved in, we would have weekly status meetings, and the team lead, in this case, it would be a team, would prepare a status report that shows their accomplishments for the last week and then their goals for the next week in terms of tasks. So this is very similar to what you're saying, although what you're saying is a little bit more personalized in terms of individual performance.
Personalized, right? So you really want that personalized individual meetings, because you don't relate you don't build a relationship with the team. You build a relationship with each individual person, and so for those people, for everyone to know and to trust, know where they are and to feel trusted, and for the manager to trust them, you want those individual relationships, individual meetings where you can talk about performance issues, performance improvements, where you stand, what you are going to work on next, and so on. More questions? 5 more seconds.
Well, I think we would like to thank you very much, Dr. Gleb, for sharing this great information. And I know the article that you sent, which we did put in our flyer that went out to our distribution, has many of these ideas in that article, and it's great information. I'm sure it will inspire many of us to implement those kinds of approaches, the hybrid first model.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Good. I'm glad it was helpful. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Tsipursky.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So before we leave, we just wanted to let you know about our upcoming events. We have an event on ChatGPT coming up in May. And our speaker, he's going to talk about ChatGPT with respect to cybersecurity sales and how it impacts cybersecurity. So do join us for that event, and we'll be talking more about ChatGPT. And then coming up in June, we have an event on data science and predictive analytics. So if you want to know about AITP events, I would suggest to go to our website, AITP-LA.org, and sign up for our newsletter so that you know when are the next events coming up. Before we leave, I would request all of you to give us your feedback on today's event. And I'm going to post that on chat also. It will take you less than 5 minutes to fill up the survey. So give me a minute to post that.